Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Black Myth Wukong. I play it on the PS5, it's also available on the PC. So in Black Myth Wukong, you play as the Destined One. You are out seeking relics to regain, I don't really know what, I'm assuming your power, because the game kicks off with like the Monkey King and going to war with the other deities. But it's basically a retelling or very heavily inspired by Journey to the West. And it's clearly a soulsborne style game. What I do like is that there's a lot of explanation, there's a lot of story, not necessarily a lot of explanation, but it's more spoon-fed to you than other games where you have to read every item description to piece anything together. But let's move on to the audio, and I like the music in this game. I think it's good. I wish there was a bit more ambient music throughout, but I do enjoy the music that is there in the cutscenes and in the rest of the game when there is music. I think it very much fits the atmosphere of the game. It works in the world. Just overall really enjoyed it. As for the voiceover work, there are times where it's a little cheesy, but overall I think it's well done. I will say I didn't necessarily love the voice actor for the Monkey King. His voice just kind of grated on my ears. Not that it was poorly done, it just didn't quite work for me. And then you've got the audio for the rest of the game, which I think is very well done, whether it's the ambient sounds of the world, your footsteps, the fighting, the other creatures, just all of that put together. The sounds of nature, everything that comes together in this game, I think is very well done when it comes to the sound effects. But let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. And as I already mentioned, this is a soulsborne game. Action RPG where you're gonna die a lot, you restart at certain points, and you continue on forward. Where it does diverge from a lot of the games as you know them is when you die, you don't just leave a pile of souls that you have to go and collect. They come with you. There's also item crafting, which I mean, not entirely unique, but everything is really kind of based around that. Your armor, your gear, healing items, etc. It's all based around crafting. You can make them yourself. You can also switch out your gear with ease. There's no weight limit. You're not weighed down by everything in your inventory. So maybe you want to have your character set up a certain way, grinding out some levels, but then when it comes to a boss, you want to equip certain armor. You can do that not quite on a fly, but pretty damn close. It works very similarly to most Soulsborne games where, you take on one or two enemies at a time. If you take on too many, you're going to get ruined. If you're not paying attention, you're going to get ruined. And there's a whole lot of boss fights. Whether they're mid-bosses, sub-bosses, whatever you want to call them, as well as secret bosses and the main bosses. And at first, in Chapter 1, I was going to say that this game is a very good entry-level Soulsborne, but then I felt like there was a big difficulty spike in Chapter 2, but it's less of a difficulty spike and more of an inconsistency that this game has as a whole. I did run into much more difficult bosses in Chapter 2, but not all of them. The first boss I fought in Chapter 2 was pretty easy, same with one of the other actual bosses. But then there were a couple that just really ruined me. It was kind of weird and felt like a huge juxtaposition compared to what I experienced in Chapter 1. I feel like Chapter 1 really does a horrible job preparing you for this game because most of the bosses in Chapter 1 you can kind of just charge head first into and beat the shit out of. But it's weird because then you get into chapters 2 and 3 and there are some bosses where you can very easily do that, but then there are other ones where you have to play more defensively, more strategically, and it's just weird because you don't know what you're getting into until you've already either beaten them or gotten wrecked. But even then, the strategy is generally fairly limited because it's dodge, you don't guard. And really, it just boils down to dodge, don't get too greedy when you're attacking, and then move along. Or you can be as greedy as you want in some fights. It's weird. It's kind of a mixed bag. But that mixed bag leads to what feels like a spike in difficulty. As for leveling, you can learn some new styles, but basically everything you're doing is staff-based, and your regular attacks kind of stay your regular attacks no matter what. It's just your heavy attacks that will shift based on the style you're choosing. And the world itself, you can run around and do some exploring. There are side missions that you don't really know are there unless you actually go looking for them, which is very Soulsborne. I mean, if you don't explore, then you're never going to get the full experience in any of those games, and that continues here. I do think the combat is pretty damn fluid, and I liked the way it worked. For the most part, it is one of those things where you do have to be a little more conscious of your button presses because, that third attack in the combo can actually last a while, and if you're not careful, you can be locked into it and not dodge in time. So I bitched about it in the last Soulsborne. I'm gonna praise it here. I felt like the lock-on worked very well here. It never felt like a struggle to lock onto the enemy I needed to, which is obviously great. And let's get on to the controls. There were a few times where I felt like I had definitely dodged and the game was like, nah, fuck you, and I got murdered. So that's obviously not cool and a pain in the ass, but it never set me back enough that I fully lost my shit. Other than those few times, I think the controls work very well. I think they're responsive for the most part when you need them to be, but I think they're smooth and they're fluid and they function very well. And I also like using the face buttons for my light and heavy attacks. I've always preferred that over the shoulder buttons. That's just me. Let's move on to the graphics and visuals, and this is a gorgeous game. Like, legitimately a beautiful game. The amount of detail in your character, which is a humanoid monkey, is impressive when it comes to like the fur and the hair or whatever you want to call it on him, and how it reacts to the wind in cutscenes and just everything in cutscenes, his own movement. But it goes beyond that. The amount of detail in the costumes is amazing. The intricacy there is really cool. I like the different designs, as well as in the weapons. I think they were actually really interesting, and each one, despite them being a staff, they were different and unique. And they had a really awesome design where it was very clear that they put a lot of love and effort into it. Then you've got your creatures, which, same story, they look amazing, and they definitely work in the world that they're building. There are a bunch of Yaogwai based on animals and other things. You've got horses, you've got monkeys, you've got foxes, wolves, etc. And they fit the roles you would expect them to based on what kind of animal they are generally. Except for the rats, they were kind of weird. Some of them were just like beefy, slow dudes, whereas you'd expect a rat to be kind of fast. That being said, the design of them was nonetheless amazing. And the different outfits and weapons that they use and just everything about their design was really cool. Some of them were kind of creepy looking. Some of them were not. Some of them were exactly kind of what you'd expect, but others very much not. So just overall, I think they did a really cool design with some of the things you ran into, the different creatures, and the different creatures that guide you in the levels, which I thought was interesting. Another thing I really enjoyed was the art style shifts. Not during the gameplay, but there are these like cutscene music videos, they literally refer to them as music videos, in between chapters. I thought that was cool. Like the first one is this animated one, beautiful animation following a monk. The second one is this guy climbing a mountain, but it's not animated. It's like a straight up throwback to like ye olde Rudolph stop motion. And you just get that, which I think is really kind of an interesting way of doing it, and it shows a certain amount of love of the craft. But let's also then focus on the world, which is absolutely stunning. The first level is like a forest on a mountain. The second one's a desert. Third is like snowy mountain. But it's all just so beautiful. The amount of detail there is also just stunning. And it's small details, which we all know I love, like how you run through water and what it looks like running through snow, but also like trees and things. And when I say trees and things, I mean like the grass and trees and small shrubs. Like you actually walk into them and they move. Your staff will touch them and they move. When you're running through snow, your staff will actually create its own path through the snow that is separate from your body. Small details like that I think are really impressive. Now, unfortunately, I did have some visual things that were kind of weird. There was one really intense big fight where like it looked like there was a mesh over the screen at some of the effects and it looked kind of ugly. But I ran into some other weird glitches. A couple of times, enemies had like these lines just kind of shooting off of them that clearly weren't meant to be there. I had some times in combat where there were some frame drops. There's an enemy where he just is missing frames when he's doing some movements, and I saw it multiple times. There was a time in the menu where the little effect behind the item I was highlighting would like lag and miss a few frames there. Right before I started recording this, I was trapped in a wall and I was able to get my way out, but I fell down a level of the thing I was climbing out of, and there are just some issues that need work. Some of them are just visual, some of them are clearly optimization. Some of them are somehow stopping me from glitching into a wall. And as I mentioned, dropping frames a couple times in combat, yes, that was a problem. I can't think of a time where those frames being dropped actually killed me because everything was still functioning the way it should have, and it was during my attack rather than enemy attack. But nonetheless, it's not something you want in a game like this. So to get into the wrap up, I don't really know what to say about the difficulty of this game because I saw a lot of people complaining that this was an incredibly hard game and they were struggling in the first chapter, which I found very easy. I think the hardest boss fight I had in the first chapter took me 7 attempts, whereas I got into the second chapter and there were a couple of bosses where I got to like 12, 13 attempts before I won. But none of those are as bad as I've experienced in some other games. So I gotta say, if you're struggling in the first chapter, this may not be the game for you, which I guess it's kind of too late that if you're finding that out. But overall, I'm gonna say if you like a Soulsborne game, I will say I don't think it's the most challenging one out there, but it's definitely not entry level either. I can recommend this game. If you're just looking for a fun Soulsborne game that's also beautiful, could use a little bit of patching, I would recommend this game. I definitely think it's actually worth the price. And overall, I really enjoyed my experience with this game. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, have you played any other games that were inspired by Journey to the West, or movies, or TV shows, or any of the above? And which is your favorite? As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.